while on the ground, experience symptoms, which really flies in the face with what locals have been told about how the air quality is safe and they shouldn't have anything to worry about. Can you talk a little bit about what you experienced while you were there?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was actually on my second trip. So this was about 6 weeks after the derailment. Most residents for that amount of time had been told, yep, everything's fine. The air is fine. No need to worry. Everything's good. Back to normal. So I'm in town. This is later in my second visit. The weather was getting a little bit warmer. And when the weather was getting a little bit warmer, I was noticing the smells a lot more. The smells were
Mm,
much more prevalent in town. I don't exactly know why that's the case. But with the warm weather from residents that I'm talking to, it gets worse. When it gets cold out, they don't notice it as much.
mm,
But I was doing an interview with a resident, Chrissy Ferguson. We were in her backyard, Sulphur Run, which is the heavily contaminated stream that runs basically right from ground zero through town and eventually feeds down into the Ohio River, is in her backyard.
mm.
And I'm interviewing her, and I got to a certain point where I actually say it in the interview. It's like, okay, like I'm really feeling this right now. I'm feeling a little bit lightheaded. My throat was feeling a little bit sore, and my neck was tightening up a little bit, actually.
Hmm.
And then for probably the next 2 to 3 hours, I had an absolutely pounding headache.
Hmm.
Um,
This home, it's going to be a lot of money
right.
to get it to.
Yeah. And I'll say too, I mean, I don't know exactly what it is, but I smell something right now standing outside that's
Yeah.
picked up pretty strongly in the last
Yeah.
couple minutes since we've been standing here.
Yeah. Yeah, it comes and goes like that.
Yeah.
When we go in the house to leave, you'll smell it worse
Yeah.
then too.
Yeah.
It's just minute by minute here.
Yeah. I mean, it's frankly, it's getting fairly bad right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's not normal for me. I don't ordinarily get headaches. I was hydrated. I don't have any other reason to believe why I would be getting a headache. But it took me a couple of hours to be feeling better. Right after that interview, I put on a respirator literally for the rest of the day while I was in town, with the exception of, when I was going to be doing an interview. And that's how I treated it the rest of that trip. It is a little weird, though, because while you're in town, it looks like things are kind of normal. It's a
Mm.
weird, eerie feeling where everyone's just kind of going about their day, doing what they need to do. But this is happening to people left and right.
But it doesn't smell normal or feel
Right.
normal. When you said to the woman you were interviewing that you were really feeling it, what was her response?
Oh, she's like, this is what we deal with, every day. So she works right in town. She is currently able to be relocated from her home because, that's why she brought me there. She showed me, she's like, hey, the inside of my home still smells. And I
Mm.
can attest that that was the case. We were in her backyard where this creek is. You can still smell it in the backyard. It kind of like comes and goes, right? It'll be like the wind blows a certain way and you start to notice it, and then it shifts and you don't notice it as much. But when this is happening all around town, it's obviously a big concern. So for Chrissy, it's a weird thing where the residents, they don't want me to get sick,
Mm.
obviously, but they, in a weird way, like feel good knowing that other people are seeing it, and other people can talk about it like I'm doing now. And even when we saw the CDC workers, we got that report from CNN last week, I believe, that CDC workers actually got sick during this. Again, none of these residents are excited that the CDC workers are necessarily getting sick, but it helps prove their case a little bit more, because unfortunately, this is something hard to show with a video camera. You can't show a smell with a video camera. You can't show some of these symptoms with a video camera. It's something that you unfortunately need to experience.
So, of course, you're talking about this story from about a week ago as we're recording this about 7 CDC workers falling ill after investigating at East Palestine. Has there been any follow-up, any messaging from the CDC about what it means for the communities in East Palestine and what kind of support they need if their own aid workers are falling ill from a much shorter exposure to the air quality in the area?
Unfortunately, still, from whether it be the CDC, the EPA, any federal agency, I'm not seeing a whole lot of anything, which is frankly ridiculous and frankly has a lot of residents very unhappy. I mean, they you're seeing the CDC workers now get sick. These residents have been talking about this week after week after week. The only time they've even been able to get kind of any sort of headway, whether it be on more accurate testing or testing for the right things, is when they can get their message out there, when they can keep hammering the point home. Initially that conversation was surrounding dioxin, which is a very, very harmful chemical that leads to cancers and all sorts of other very terrible, deadly diseases and issues and complications in the future. They only got any sort of dioxin testing after begging and begging and begging for it. And even now, we are barely getting the beginning of those results like I said, almost 10 weeks later. So unfortunately, residents are very unhappy with the response from the federal government. And we're really not hearing anything else other than it's fine to be in town. These people are still being told it's fine and good to be there when their bodies are telling them otherwise.
So what are the results of the dioxin testing that you just referenced? And generally speaking, of course, it's the case that just because one can smell something doesn't mean it's necessarily harmful, or that an odor necessarily means that you're being exposed to carcinogens, or that you're being exposed at the levels that are necessary to cause any kind of longer term harm. So what do we know about the correlation between what people are experiencing, either in the way, by the way of smells or short-term symptoms, and the real risks that they are facing with longer-term, more serious health effects like cancer?
Mm-hmm. Right. So I'll start with the dioxin part of this, and then I will get into the other kind of potential implications and other chemicals involved that are being tested for, and in many cases not being tested for. So with dioxin, we're still in the early stages of getting some of the like residential soil testing and this sort of stuff back, but we do have dioxin testing from contaminated soil that was removed from East Palestine, and it was actually had been shipped to Indiana to like an EPA approved site. These contaminants are being shipped to these sites that are meant to be able to control this sort of waste in different parts of the country. And Indiana ran some of their own tests on the soil. They found dioxin levels that are significantly elevated above what the EPA in 2010 said was a concern for causing risks of cancer. Now, I will say that this is soil that was literally right from the ground zero site of this, but there are homes basically right there. I mean, this happened in several people's backyard, essentially. And just be, and the levels of the dioxin in that soil was significantly higher than what it would need to be to cause cancer. So if we start to go out a little bit further and see what this looks like, and again, we're kind of just now starting to get some of those results, like in the next coming days and weeks, I'll be very curious to see where they are. But the idea that officials can be telling these folks that it's safe to be there until you have all of that information is absolutely outrageous. So that's the dioxin side of it. On the other side of it, you mentioned, being able to smell it, and that might not necessarily meaning that's a cause of concern. So there's one chemical in question here. And if I get a little too in the weeds here, please stop me, because I have gotten very, very, unfortunately, I, like many residents, have had to become an expert in a lot of these chemicals. I'm fortunate to have a lot of folks who I've been able to consult with on and off the record to be able to teach me a lot of this stuff. But one of the chemicals of concern, butyl acrylate, is what federal officials are blaming the smells on. In most cases, that is what the company CTEH, which is a contractor for Norfolk Southern, who has been doing air tests, as well as the EPA has been saying is very likely what people are smelling. So with butyl acrylate, if the odor threshold is very, very low, there is a possibility that if you can smell butyl acrylate, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's above the level of concern set out by the EPA. One big admission that I discovered about a week and a half ago at a small town hall event that was very lightly covered by the media was that butyl acrylate, with the devices that are being used by the EPA and CTEH for the residential air testing, can only be picked up at a level of 100 parts per billion with the device that they're using. It's a little handheld device called a PID, a photoionization detector. The issue is that butyl acrylate is a level of concern at 20 parts per billion. So in other words, you need to have butyl acrylate at the level 5 times higher than what it should be for that detector to even pick it up. So that's a major, major red flag right there. Add on top of that those devices cannot pick up other chemical byproducts of burned vinyl chloride, some of those including formaldehyde, hydrogen chloride, and phosgene. It would never pick up phosgene with one of those devices. And with formaldehyde, you'd need a special attachment and have the device in a special setting to be able to do it. But if you do that, you can't test for the other things. So that tells me that a lot of this stuff, unfortunately, hasn't been tested for.
And phosgene is that World War I era weapon of war gas, right?
Yeah.
Look, how is this happening? I mean, we talked about this on Rising last week, this revelation that you picked up on in this meeting that, as you point out, doesn't seem to have been really covered anywhere else, that the devices that are being used to track chemical exposure in East Palestine are not sensitive enough to pick up the levels of chemicals at levels at which they would be harmful, right? Has there been any follow-up on that reality since that admission was made publicly?
Basically, no, which is absolutely outrageous. It's like, again, the EPA admitted this. I didn't have to go find some, like weird source to go prove this. The EPA admitted this at a public town hall event. They just admitted it. A resident asked the question, the EPA admitted it. It hasn't been covered anywhere else from my knowledge. And no one from the EPA, no one from the federal government, no one from the state government has said, okay, we need to go back and redo everybody's residential home test. None of that has happened, which is absolutely, it's outrageous. I mean, these folks shouldn't have to be begging to get this stuff. This is basic things that they're asking for. Hey, can you do an air test in my home to make sure that it's safe? And not lie to me about it. If you don't have a device to test at that level, just tell people you don't have a device and wait until you can get it before you tell them that it's safe to go home.
Right. Well, what is being offered to residents who don't want to stay in East Palestine while they're getting all of this conflicting information?
Mm-hmm. So from a government agency, basically, they're being offered essentially nothing still at this point, which blows my mind. So right now, if a resident wants to be able to relocate from East Palestine while the cleanup is still happening, again, the soil removal is still happening. The smells and stuff are still happening weeks after this derailment. So if a resident wants to leave right now, they need to go to Norfolk Southern's, they call it the Family Assistance Center. And spend however many hours it may take. Some residents I've talked to, one in particular, her name is Candace, over 3 days had to spend 23 hours going back and forth at the assistance center to try to get relocation for her and her children, who some of which ended up in the hospital with breathing complications and all sorts of other things as a result of this derailment. And she is not the only one. My first trip in East Palestine, the first morning, actually, I was there. The first thing we did was we went to that assistance center. It didn't open until 10 o'clock in the morning. We got there at 8 a.m., 2 hours beforehand. And there was a line about 50, 60 people deep waiting there because they were afraid that they were going to be turned away because they're only taking so many people per day. So if folks want to get any sort of financial assistance to be able to go stay in a hotel outside of East Palestine, so that they can sleep at night and not be worried about, breathing in potential carcinogens. They need to go beg the railroad that caused all of their problems in the first place to be able to get it. And in some cases, the railroad is telling them no. It's outrageous.
Do you know how how Norfolk Southern is making those kinds of decisions?
So it sounds crazy, but it literally changes almost on a daily basis. If you go one day and you talk to, let's say one of the representatives' name is Bob. Bob might tell you no, but the next day, if you get Sally might give you the money. If you go and unfortunately, like some of these residents are like, yeah, they didn't give me it yesterday, so I had to go in again today and cry. And when I cried, they gave me the money. I mean, these people, and that I'm not making that up. Like that is an actual thing that residents are telling me that they're needing to do in order to get this sort of assistance. And the fact that, again, 10 weeks later, residents to get assistance are needing to go to the company that caused their problems in the first place, rather than having there be some sort of state government or federal government intermediary for them to be able to do this through is crazy. I mean, I think that Norfolk Southern should be the one paying for all of this. Don't get me wrong. But let's have a third party in between, essentially making it so that these folks don't need to beg the people who cause their issues to be able to do it, and then get that third party to get the railroad to reimburse afterwards.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated by the dynamic of these town halls, who's in attendance, what kind of questions are being asked, the extent to which they don't seem to be very heavily covered, and what kind of admissions are being made. If already we know that there was basically this pretty significant admission that the testing devices aren't sensitive enough to actually pick up levels of chemicals that could be harmful, what else is coming out here? Could you give us a picture, paint a picture of the tenor of these kinds of town halls, and what the kind of emotional tenor of the residents is like right now. Are they angry? Are they resigned? Are there a lot of blaming statements? And if so, who is the target of that blame?
Right. So I'd say there's kind of an arc of how the town halls have gone over time. So the very first town hall, we were not yet in town yet, but that is one that did get a lot of coverage. It was held in the gymnasium at the school, and people were no one knew what was going on, was the clear thing, and that was the first real time that Norfolk Southern just didn't show up. They said something along the lines of, "We're worried for our safety." So that kind of tells you who people were angry at that point, rightfully so. But they wouldn't even show up to answer any questions at that point. The mayor was there trying to answer questions, but this mayor we're talking a town of 4,500 people. The mayor in this town is a part-time elected position. We're not talking like a career politician or anything. I'm pretty sure he has another job in addition to this. So the mayor's trying to answer questions. The fire chief's trying to answer questions. But without the railroad there wasn't much to be able to get out. So that's the first town hall. The second big town hall I was at in person, it was a week of craziness in East Palestine. This town hall happened. The next day, Donald Trump was in town. The day after that, Aaron Brockovich was in town. There was a lot going on during that week, and that town hall was very well attended. There was people standing outside of the door trying to listen in to see what was going on. And at that town hall, the questions really shifted from, very more basic questions, because people didn't know exactly what happened, to, okay, what specifically are the health implications of all of this? Am I safe right now? What specific things do I need to be focused on? And very notably, that second town hall, this is something I really appreciated about it. A group called River Valley Organizing had put it on, and there were no government officials present. It was a science expert. His name's Stephen Lester. He's like a health and science person.
Dioxins, this category, there's like 75 of these dioxins. One of them is the most toxic chemical ever tested in the United States. It is a nasty chemical. And so there's a reason, I think, why the government isn't testing for this, and why, if the EPA has made one major mistake in their testing thus far, it was ignoring dioxin, almost pretending like it didn't exist.
You did a great job explaining a lot of the talk about dioxins and everything tonight. The testing, the fact that is not being done, that the US EPA, even at this point, still isn't providing any dioxin testing. They had a lawyer there. They had an environmental type person. I'm forgetting the organization she was from, more focused on like the water element of things. It was a kind of a impartial body of people who had the knowledge to be able to like answer these people's questions without having some sort of hidden agenda behind it, essentially. And people appreciated that and felt more comfortable, I think, asking some of these questions. And at that town hall, folks got a lot of answers, especially that was when the topic of dioxin kind of first came up, which we talked about a little bit already. And then now moving forward, I mean, this last town hall that, there was a live stream of it is the numbers have dwindled a little bit, smaller participation. There were probably 30 or so residents in the room. And this one, though, did have the mayor at it. It had an official from the EPA. It was supposed to have a representative from Norfolk Southern, who at the very last minute canceled conveniently. But in this third one, the questions have gotten very, very specific because, like I said, these residents have had to become experts. And I think that is why we got the admission that the device wasn't properly there. I think that a resident had done the research. They had essentially figured this out on their own and made the EPA admit it like privately. And then the resident came specifically to ask that question and get it out into the open. So they've gotten very tactful in a good way, the residents. As far as their energy, I think they are getting very tired of needing to deal with this.
Needs addressed is, why are we getting sick? Why are our children getting sick? And at least from what I've been seeing, I have a lot of people reach out to me, because I am an organizer. Kids that weren't sick before are now getting sick.
But the fight is absolutely still there. I mean, these folks, like I said, I get texts every single day from multiple people with little updates of what's going on this or what's happening here.
Mm.
So they're still fighting. They're angry. I would say most of the anger is focused on Norfolk Southern, but there's definitely a lot of anger at federal officials, state officials, both sides of the aisle, because frankly, none of those folks have come through for them in any real way.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.